My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 74 years old, and my own son locked me in an industrial freezer to die. Before I tell you how I turned that icy tomb into the forge for my cold, hard justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Started with a push. Not a violent shove but a firm deliberate pressure on my back. I stumbled forward on the slick floor, my arms pinwheeling for a moment before I caught my balance. Brenda, my loyal warehouse manager, cried out next to me. A sharp sound of surprise that was cut short by a sound I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my days. A heavy final thud. It was the sound of a vault door closing. The sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. The thick insulated door of the walk-in freezer swung shut, plunging us into a dim, ghostly twilight lit only by a single, caged emergency bulb in the far corner. For a split second there was just confusion. I turned, my breath already fogging in the frigid air, and saw his face through the small double-paned glass window on the door. My son, Ethan. There was no panic in his eyes. No "oh my God mom, are you okay?" No rush to wrench the heavy handle back open. He just stood there, his face a calm, placid mask. I saw a strange glint in his eyes, something cold, calculating. A look I'd never seen on the face of the boy I'd raised. I rushed to the door, my bare hands slapping against the freezing metal. "Ethan, what are you doing? Open the door." My voice was a muffled thump against the thick steel. He didn't seem to hear. Or maybe he didn't want to. He just raised his cell phone, his fingers tapping out a quick message. Then he held the screen up to the glass. The bright letters burned into my memory. "It's for the best, Mom." My blood ran cold. And it wasn't from the freezing air seeping through the seals. It was the chilling realization that this was no accident. The boy I had taught to ride a bike, the one whose fevers I'd cooled with a damp cloth, whose college tuition I paid for with the profits from our family business, was leaving me here to die. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked away. No hesitation. I watched his silhouette disappear down the long warehouse aisle, leaving Brenda and me trapped in the frozen dark. "Oh my God, he's crazy!" Brenda screamed, pounding on the door with both fists. "Help! Somebody help us!" But there was no one to hear. This part of the warehouse was isolated. The stocking crews had gone home for the day. We were alone. Completely and utterly alone. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. The temperature inside these freezers is kept at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. A person, especially a 74-year-old woman in a light cardigan, wouldn't last more than a few hours. He knew that. He had counted on it. "We're going to die in here, Eleanor." Brenda sobbed, her body already starting to tremble violently. The cold was a living thing, a predator. It bit at my exposed skin, crept up my arms and legs, and started to sink its icy teeth deep into my bones. A wave of cold despair washed over me, colder than the air itself. For a moment I just wanted to close my eyes, to let the memory of my dear, departed husband Arthur carry me away from this nightmare. Could just let go. But then something else rose up from the depths of my soul. It wasn't hope. It was rage. Pure defiant rage. A hot flash crawled up my neck, a furnace igniting in my chest. He would not be the author of my final chapter. This betrayal would not be the last word in the story Arthur and I had built with our own sweat and tears. He thought he was leaving a weak-old woman to freeze. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. In that freezing darkness, as the cold began to seep into my bones, only one question burned in my mind. How did my son, my own flesh and blood, become this monster? To understand how a son could do that to his mother, you have to understand what he was trying to steal. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just a business. It was a life. It was my life and the life of his father, Arthur, poured into Texas soil. Our story didn't start in a sterile boardroom with charts and projections. It started in the suffocating heat of a Texas summer, with a roadside pit smoker Arthur welded together from an old oil drum and a 5-gallon bucket of my grandmother's secret barbecue sauce. That was our entire business plan. For the first 2 years our world smelled of hickory smoke, caramelized sugar and sweat. We'd work from before the sun was up until long after it had set, our hands stained and our backs aching. I'd serve brisket and ribs on squares of butcher paper to hungry truckers, my hair tied back in a bandana, while Arthur, with his big booming laugh that could be heard over the roar of the highway, would man the pit. He didn't just sell food. He sold stories, a moment of comfort on a long road. He treated every customer like an old friend. That was our foundation. We built it slow brick by painful brick. That one pit turned into a small shack with 4 tables. That shack turned into a real restaurant with a waiting list on Friday nights. And over 40 years of 16-hour days, Vance Barbecue Supply became an empire. Not a fancy corporate one, but a Texas one, built on firm handshakes and a promise that our quality was our bond. We had 5 major supply centers across the state, and our sauce, the same recipe from my grandmother, was in every grocery store from Dallas to San Antonio. It was more than a business. It was our legacy, our third child. Ethan was born right in the middle of it all. A child of smoke and ambition. He was a sharp kid, smart as a whip. While his friends were out playing baseball, he'd be in the back office with me, watching our accountants, asking sharp questions about profit margins and inventory turnover that made grown men blink. Arthur was so proud his chest would swell. "That boy's got a mind for business, Ellie," he'd say, ruffling Ethan's hair. "He's going to take what we built and touch the sky with it." I believed him. We both did. But looking back with the clarity that only unimaginable pain can provide, I see the signs were there. Little flickers of a fire I mistook for ambition. I'll never forget the year Ethan was 14 at the State Fair of Texas. He'd raised a magnificent prize-winning steer for the 4-H youth auction, a project he'd worked on all year. He'd made a handshake deal to sell it to a young family just starting their own herd. It was a good fair price that would give them a strong start. But at the last minute, just before the auctioneer started the bidding, a wealthy oilman from Houston, dripping in turquoise and silver, saw the blue ribbon and offered Ethan triple the price in cash, right there on the spot. Ethan took it without a second thought, leaving that young family standing there with empty hands and broken hearts. When I pulled him aside, my voice tight with disappointment, he just shrugged, that charming, disarming smile already perfected. "A deal's a deal, Mom," he said, fanning the crisp $100 bills. And his was just a better one. "It's not personal, it's just business." It felt like a cold stone dropped in my stomach, but I let it go. I told myself he was learning, that he was just driven. I praised his sharp mind then, never realizing I was looking at the first flicker of a fire that would one day try to consume me whole. I just saw my brilliant son, the heir to our hard-won kingdom, the one who would protect our family's inheritance. He went off to get his MBA from a fancy East Coast school, and he came back a different person. He was polished, slick, armed with a vocabulary of corporate jargon that made my head spin. He talked about leveraging assets, optimizing supply chains, and aggressive growth strategies. Arthur, bless his heart, was old school. He believed in people over profits always. Their weekly meetings often turned into shouting matches. Ethan wanted to take on massive debt to expand into other states. Arthur wanted to grow steady, the way we always had, without owing a dime to anyone. "This company is not a poker chip, son," Arthur would roar. And Ethan would just smile that cool, infuriating smile and say, "Dad, with all due respect, you're thinking like a small-town pitmaster, not a CEO." But after Arthur passed from a sudden massive heart attack 5 years ago, after the grief of the funeral had settled into a quiet, permanent ache in our home, the arguments stopped. There was no one left to challenge him. That flicker of ambition was no longer a flicker. It began to grow into an inferno, and I was too blinded by my own sorrow to see the smoke. The first year after Arthur's funeral is a ghost in my memory. A gray, formless blur of just trying to get out of bed in the morning. The grief was a physical weight, a constant pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. The empire we'd built, the noisy, bustling world of suppliers and shipments, felt hollow and silent without his booming laugh echoing down the halls. Ethan stepped up, of course. He took the reins with a calm, reassuring confidence that, at the time, felt like a blessing from heaven. "Don't you worry about a single thing, Mom," he'd say, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder as I stared blankly at a stack of invoices. "I'll handle the numbers. I'll handle the lawyers and the contracts. You just focus on getting back on your feet." And I let him. Oh God, I was so grateful to let him. The thought of navigating that world of spreadsheets and legal documents without Arthur by my side was overwhelming. So I retreated. I took a step back, focusing on the things I loved, perfecting a new mesquite-based sauce recipe, calling our oldest customers just to check in. I let him take over the meetings with the accountants. I let him renegotiate the contracts with our suppliers. I let him handle the planning for the future. I trusted him completely. He was my son Arthur's son. It was his inheritance to protect. The changes started so subtly I barely noticed them. First, our weekly financial review meetings, a sacred tradition Arthur and I had for 40 years, started getting postponed. "I'm swamped, Mom," Ethan would say, his voice full of feigned exhaustion. "Let me get the spreadsheets organized better so it's easier for you. We'll sit down next week, I promise." When we finally did meet, the thick binders of detailed reports I was used to were replaced by a single-page summary with glossy, colorful charts. All the arrows pointed up. "I simplified it so you wouldn't get tired," he'd explain patiently, as if talking to a child. "It's all good news." I, the woman who had balanced our books by hand on my kitchen table for the first 15 years, felt a flicker of indignation. But I swallowed it. I told myself he was just being a good, considerate son, protecting his grieving mother. Then longtime employees, men and women who had been with us since they were teenagers, started getting generously offered early retirement packages. Good people. Loyal people. "It was a tough decision, Mom, but it's a necessary restructuring for a leaner, more efficient operation," he'd say. Our trusted family-owned Texas meat suppliers, families we'd worked with for generations, were suddenly replaced by a new faceless food corporation from out of state. "I got a much better price on a bulk contract," was the justification. Every time I questioned him, he had a smooth, logical, MBA-approved answer that made me feel old-fashioned, out of touch, irrelevant. That's when the other thing started, the thing that was far more sinister. I began feeling unwell. Not sick exactly, but off. I'd be standing in the kitchen and a sudden wave of dizziness would wash over me, making me grip the counter. I'd walk into a room and completely forget why I was there. One time I missed a crucial appointment with our estate lawyer. An appointment I was sure was the following week. Ethan's concern was immediate and suffocating. He'd rushed to my side, taking my blood pressure, his brow furrowed with the perfect amount of loving worry. He took over managing all my prescriptions. "Here, Mom, let me handle this for you," he said one afternoon, neatly sorting my pills into a weekly organizer. "You've got enough on your plate." I felt a pang of guilt for being such a burden. The dizzy spells got worse. The forgetfulness became more frequent, more embarrassing. He started insisting on joining my phone calls with my other children, my daughter Claire in California and my youngest son Mark in Colorado. He would sigh and tell them, "I'm really worried about Mom. She's been mixing things up, getting confused." And because they'd call me and I'd sometimes stumble over a name or forget a recent event, they believed him. I could hear the pity in their voices, that sad sort of resignation a child has for an aging parent. I felt a wall of glass being built around me, and Ethan was holding the blueprints. "You see, Mom," Ethan would say to me gently when we were alone, his voice a soft murmur of concern. "You're getting forgetful. It's a good thing I'm here to take care of you." He was so convincing he made me feel like I was losing my mind. And the worst part, the most terrifying part, is that I started to believe him. The foundation of my own mind, the one thing I had always relied on, felt like it was crumbling to dust. Was it grief? Was it old age? Or was I slowly being poisoned not just in spirit but in body as well? The moment of clarity, the first crack in the fog Ethan had so carefully constructed around me, came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in Arthur's old office at the house, a room that had become my sanctuary, a place I hadn't had the heart to change since he died. I was just running a dust cloth over his big, imposing oak desk, trying to feel close to him, when my hand brushed against a small, almost invisible latch on the underside of the desktop. I'd sat at that desk 1,000 times and never noticed it before. My heart gave a little thump of curiosity. I fumbled with the latch for a moment, and a false panel in the knee-hole of the desk swung down, revealing a hidden, felt-lined compartment. Inside was a single heavy leather-bound ledger. It wasn't a company book. It was Arthur's private record book. My hands were shaking as I lifted it out and opened it. His meticulous, strong handwriting filled the pages. This was his personal inventory, a secret record of every major asset, every piece of land, Every private investment he'd made for our family's future, updated just a month before his heart attack. It was his roadmap to secure our family's inheritance. I ran my finger down the list of properties, my eyes scanning familiar names. And then my finger stopped. My breath caught in my throat. 500-acre ranch, Gillespie County, Hill Country. Prime real estate. For the grandchildren's college fund. I stared at the entry. The Hill Country Ranch. It was a spectacular piece of land Arthur had been so proud of. A long-term investment he'd always said would be worth a fortune one day. I hadn't seen that property on any of Ethan's recent corporate asset reports. In the simplified, glossy world of his presentations, it simply didn't exist. That night, a cold, hard resolve settled over me, pushing aside the dizzying fog. I waited until well after midnight, until I was sure the main office was empty. I let myself in with my old master key, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It felt so wrong, like a betrayal, to be sneaking into my own company like a thief. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. Ethan's corner office was immaculate, sterile. His computer was locked down tight, but I wasn't looking for digital files. I went straight to his heavy metal filing cabinet, the one marked corporate restructuring. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. Drawer after drawer of boring corporate files. And then I found it. A thick hanging folder labeled simply EV Enterprises. My breath hitched. Inside was a stack of legal documents, sale contracts, deeds, and right on top the deed to our Hill Country Ranch. It had been sold 6 months ago for a ridiculously low price, a tenth of its market value, to a shell company. The name of that company was EV Enterprises. Ethan Vance. The air was stolen right out of my lungs. It felt like a physical punch to the gut. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was the final heartbreaking confirmation. He wasn't protecting our inheritance. He was systematically stealing it, funneling our family's assets into his own private company. I confronted him at dinner the next Sunday. I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid a photocopy of the fraudulent deed on the polished dining room table between us. Explain this, Ethan. He didn't even flinch. He picked it up, glanced at it, and let out a soft, condescending laugh that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Oh, Mom, you signed these papers last month. Don't you remember?" he said, his voice dripping with false patience. "We had to move the asset into a new holding company for tax purposes. It's a very complex strategy. Your memory is failing you." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "That is not my signature. And I've never heard of any EV Enterprises." That's when I saw a flicker of something ugly in his eyes. Raw annoyance. "I am trying to protect our assets from a crushing tax burden, and you're making these wild, paranoid accusations," he said, his voice turning sharp. "Honestly, Mom, it's the grief. It's your age. You're getting confused." That was his weapon, and he wielded it with surgical precision. My age, my grief, my supposed confusion. The very next day, I looked closely at the pill he handed me for my blood pressure. It looked slightly different than I remembered. The color was a shade off. On a gut-wrenching hunch, I pretended to put it in my mouth and take a sip of water, but I palmed it instead. Later that afternoon, I drove to a small independent pharmacy in the next town over, a place where no one knew me. The old pharmacist, a kind man with wire-rimmed glasses, took the pill and put it under a magnifying light. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up at me over his glasses, his expression deeply troubled. "Ma'am," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "This isn't a blood pressure medication. This is a mild sedative. It can cause significant dizziness, confusion, and memory loss, especially in older folks. It's not something you should be taking without a doctor's direct supervision." He wasn't just trying to steal my company. He was trying to steal my sanity, my credibility, my very self, one little pill at a time. And I knew then that this was a fight for more than just money or a lawyer. It was a fight for my life. The pharmacist's words echoed in my head all the way home. A chilling confirmation of a truth so monstrous my mind could barely accept it. A sedative. My own son was drugging me. It wasn't just greed. It was a cold, methodical plan to dismantle me as a person, to make me appear incompetent to my other children, to our employees, to our lawyers, and ultimately to myself. The world suddenly felt like it was tilted on its axis. Who could I possibly trust? My other children, Claire and Mark, already thought I was becoming frail and confused, thanks to Ethan's careful, loving performance as the burdened son. If I told them, would they believe me? Or would they believe the mountain of evidence Ethan had been building against my sanity? I had one person left. Frank, Arthur's best friend and our company accountant for 30 years before Ethan had unceremoniously pushed him into a forced retirement. Frank was as honest as the Texas sky is wide, and he loved Arthur like a brother. I called him, my voice trembling so much I could barely speak. Frank, I need to see you. It's about Arthur's legacy. And it's urgent. We met at a small, greasy spoon diner off the highway, a place where the coffee was bitter and the vinyl on the booths was cracked. A place no one would recognize us. I laid everything out on the sticky Formica table. Arthur's hidden ledger, the photocopies of the fraudulent deeds from Ethan's office, and the single sedative pill in a small plastic bag. Frank's face, normally so cheerful and ruddy, hardened into a mask of grim disbelief as he examined each piece of evidence. He studied the documents for almost an hour, his silence punctuated only by the clinking of our coffee cups and the distant rumble of trucks on the interstate. He held the pill up to the light, his jaw tight. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a sorrowful protective rage. "Ellie," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "this is worse than you think. This is worse than I could have ever imagined. This isn't just theft. He's gutting the company from the inside out. He's moving all the valuable assets, the real estate, the capital into these shell corporations. He's setting it up to declare the original company bankrupt, leaving nothing but a husk with all the debts, while he walks away with the fortune. He's preparing to leave nothing but a smoldering crater where Vance Barbecue Supply used to be." He pointed a trembling finger at the sedative. "And this is a criminal act. This is assault. He's building a case to have you declared legally incompetent. He wants to take everything, Ellie, including your voice, your freedom." He mentioned we needed to find a good lawyer, someone completely off Ethan's radar. A few days later, Ethan's plan escalated with terrifying speed. He came to me with that same cheerful, concerned smile, telling me he'd made an appointment for me with a top neurologist in Houston. "Just to get a baseline, Mom," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "to make sure we're taking the best possible care of you as you navigate this difficult time." I knew it was a trap, but I had to walk into it. If I refused, it would only confirm his narrative that I was being difficult and paranoid. The doctor's office was sleek and modern, all glass and chrome, and it felt as cold as a tomb. The doctor himself was young, handsome, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He asked me a series of insulting basic memory questions. "Who is the president, Mrs. Vance? What year is it?" Then he held up a picture of a simple boat and asked me what it was called. It was a calculated act of humiliation, and I had to sit there and play along, pretending to struggle for the answers, while my mind was screaming in outrage. At the end of the evaluation, he turned to Ethan with a grave, rehearsed expression. "I'm seeing some concerning signs of cognitive decline," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We'll need more tests, of course, but I would strongly recommend she step back from any major financial or legal decisions for the time being. It would be best for her own well-being." He had been bought. He was a pawn in Ethan's sick game. On the long, silent drive home, Ethan was beaming. "See, Mom," he said, patting my hand. "It's no shame to admit you need to slow down. I'll handle everything from now on. You don't have to worry your pretty little head about it anymore." He thought he had me cornered. He thought he had stripped me of my own mind in the eyes of the world. You have to understand, at this point I felt completely and utterly alone. Every door seemed to be closing in my face. My health was being manipulated, my reputation was being systematically destroyed, and my own family saw me as a confused old woman fading into dementia. No one saw the predator hiding in plain sight. Stick with me, because what he did next goes beyond anything you can possibly imagine. Ethan had isolated me, he had discredited me, and he was actively poisoning me. I knew he needed one final decisive move to take everything. I just never ever imagined it would be a walk-in freezer. The call came on a Thursday morning. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless Texas blue. It was Ethan, and his voice was different. The condescending, placating concern was gone, replaced by a tone I hadn't heard in years, the sound of the loving, remorseful son I thought I'd lost forever. It was a masterful performance. "Mom, I've been a jerk," he said, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine emotion. "I've been thinking and you were right. I've been overbearing. The pressure of the business, of trying to live up to Dad's legacy. It's been getting to me. I was wrong to push you. I was wrong about everything." A treacherous, foolish hope flickered in my chest. What if this was real? What if he'd finally seen the error of his ways? What if I could get my son back? He went on, telling me he wanted to make it up to me. He asked if I could meet him at the main supply warehouse that afternoon. "There's a problem with the new frozen goods inventory system," he said, his voice earnest. "It's a complete mess, and nobody here knows how to organize a warehouse like you and Dad did. I need your eyes on it, Mom. Please. Like the old days." My gut, the same instinct that had guided me in business for 40 years, screamed that it was a trap. Every rational thought I had told me to stay home, lock the doors and call Frank. But another part of me, the foolish, hopeful mother who still lived somewhere deep inside, clung to his words. I decided to go. But I wouldn't go alone. I called Brenda, our most trusted warehouse manager, a tough, no-nonsense woman who had started with us packing boxes 30 years ago. I told her I needed her help with a surprise inspection of the new inventory system. She was my insurance policy. At 3 o'clock sharp, we met Ethan at the warehouse entrance. He smiled warmly when he saw me, but I saw a brief, almost imperceptible flash of annoyance in his eyes when he noticed Brenda at my side. He concealed it in a heartbeat. "Great, the more the merrier," he said, his voice a little too bright. "Brenda, always good to see you." He led us through the cavernous warehouse, our footsteps echoing in the vast space. We walked past towering shelves stacked high with sacks of spices, boxes of supplies, and vats of our famous sauce. The air was thick with the familiar, comforting smell of cardboard, cleaning supplies, and cold steel. He talked endlessly about logistics and new efficiency protocols, his corporate jargon a meaningless drone as he led us deeper and deeper into the massive building, toward the isolated, humming refrigerated section at the very back. It felt like walking into the belly of a whale. "The main problem is in here," he said, gesturing to the largest walk-in freezer, the one we use for storing thousands of pounds of bulk brisket and ribs. A thick cloud of icy vapor billowed out as he pulled the heavy, insulated door open. The sudden blast of Arctic air hit my face like a slap. "After you, Mom." I hesitated for just a fraction of a second. The alarm bells in my head were deafening. But what could I do? Refuse? Accuse him right here and now? I took a deep breath, telling myself I was being paranoid, and stepped over the threshold into the biting cold. Brenda followed right behind me. I had barely taken 2 steps on the grated metal floor when I felt the push. It wasn't a violent shove, but a firm, deliberate, unstoppable pressure on the small of my back. I stumbled forward, my arms pinwheeling for a moment to keep my balance. At the exact same moment, I heard Brenda's sharp cry of surprise and pain beside me. And then that sound. That final soul-crushing, world-ending thud. The heavy door slammed shut, and the main lights inside the freezer cut out in the same instant, plunging us into the ghastly, dim glow of a single, caged emergency bulb. We were trapped. I spun around, my heart exploding in my chest like a firework. Through the small, double-paned glass window, now rapidly fogging over, I saw him. His face was no longer smiling. It was a mask of cold, serene triumph. He raised his cell phone, the screen glowing in the dim warehouse corridor. The bright, cruel letters burned into my memory for all time. "It's for the best, Mom." Then, as Brenda and I began to scream and beat our fists against the unyielding metal, he performed his final, most chilling act. He reached up and turned off the main lights in the warehouse corridor, plunging the world outside our icy prison into absolute darkness. The cold was instantaneous and brutal. It was an assault. "We have to find a way out," I yelled, my voice sounding thin and weak in the insulated space. We clawed at the walls, our fingers already growing numb, searching for the internal emergency release latch. There was one, but the mechanism had been expertly tampered with. It was jammed solid. He had planned this meticulously. Hours crawled by, each minute an eternity. The cold was a physical pain, thousands of tiny sharp needles pricking every inch of my skin. To stay alive, we had to keep moving. We huddled together for warmth, our bodies shaking uncontrollably in a violent, shared tremor, and paced the small, clear area on the floor. We sang old church hymns, our voices cracking. We recited the names of all 50 states over and over. Anything to keep our minds from shutting down, from succumbing to the deadly lethargy of the cold. At some point in the depths of the freezing twilight, I started to hallucinate. I saw Arthur standing in the far corner, his warm smile beckoning me toward a peaceful, welcoming darkness. "Not yet, Arthur," I whispered, my teeth chattering too hard to speak clearly. "I'm not done fighting yet." My will to live, my stubbornness, was now fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. I would not die here. I would not let him win. I found a loose metal pipe from a broken shelf, my fingers barely able to close around it. With what little strength I had left, I began to bang it against the resonant steel wall. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. A weak, desperate, rhythmic SOS. A tiny sound of defiance against the immense, killing silence. Just as the blackness started to creep in at the edges of my vision, as my limbs grew numb and heavy as lead, I heard a faint, unfamiliar sound from the other side of the door. It wasn't my son. It was the high-pitched squeak of a janitor's cart. It was the sound of a miracle. The woman who opened that door was an angel named Maria, a cleaning lady who wasn't even supposed to be in that section of the warehouse that night. Her coworker had called in sick, so she was covering the shift. She told me later, her eyes wide with awe, that she heard a faint rhythmic tapping, and her intuition, a little voice inside, told her something was deeply wrong. Her intuition saved our lives. The moments after that are a chaotic, painful blur. I remember the shock of the warmer air on my frozen skin, a sensation so intense it felt like being set on fire. I remember the frantic voices of paramedics, the rough texture of wool blankets being draped over my shaking shoulders, and the agonizing burning pain as the feeling slowly, torturously returned to my limbs. They told me later at the hospital that my body temperature had dropped to 82 degrees. Brenda's was even lower. The paramedics said another 30 minutes, and that would have been it. We were alive by a razor's edge, a miracle woven from a sick day and a woman who listened to her gut. I was in the ICU for a week, my body waging a war against a severe case of pneumonia I'd developed from breathing in that icy, corrosive air for nearly 7 hours. As I lay there, a fragile thing tangled in a nest of wires and tubes, Ethan was a constant, suffocating presence at my bedside. To the doctors, to the nurses, to my other children, Claire and Mark, who had flown in, their faces etched with worry, he was the image of a devoted, heartbroken son. He brought flowers that filled the sterile room with a sickeningly sweet scent. He held my hand with a grip that felt possessive. He wept tears that never reached his cold, watchful eyes. "Oh, Mom," he'd say, his voice choked with perfectly rehearsed tears for everyone to hear. "I can't believe this happened. A faulty door latch. It's a tragedy. I've already called a lawyer. I'm going to sue the manufacturer of that freezer. We'll make them pay for this negligence." He was a phenomenal actor. He had everyone fooled. His performance was flawless. Everyone but me. One night, late, when the hospital was quiet and the halls were dim, he came into my room. He thought I was asleep, heavily sedated and lost to the world. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the expensive cologne on his shirt, the same scent he'd been wearing in the warehouse. He thought I was unconscious, a broken shell just waiting to expire. He let the mask slip completely. "You just had to be stubborn, didn't you?" he whispered, his voice a venomous, chilling hiss that cut straight through the haze of medication. "You should have died in there, you stubborn old woman. All my planning ruined. Next time I won't fail." In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It froze solid. Whatever lingering foolish hope I had for the son I once knew, whatever shred of maternal love was left cowering in the ruins of my heart, it turned to ice and shattered into a million sharp, glittering pieces. The grief I felt was for a boy who had died a long, long time ago. The man standing over my hospital bed was a stranger, a monster wearing my son's face. And in its place, something colder, harder, and far more dangerous took root. My fear was gone, burned away by the cold and replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a shard of ice in my own heart. I finally understood. This wasn't about getting my company back anymore. This wasn't about bringing my son to justice. This was a war for survival. It was him or me. When the doctor came to do his rounds the next morning, Ethan was by my side, holding my hand, playing the part of the dutiful son. The doctor asked me gently if I remembered what had happened. I looked at Ethan, at his handsome, concerned face. Then I looked back at the doctor, and I let my eyes go vacant and cloudy. I'm not sure, I whispered, my voice intentionally weak and raspy, the words catching in my throat. I remember being cold. So cold. But how I got in there? It's all a blank. A big dark blank. I saw the flicker of triumph in Ethan's eyes, a subtle relaxing of the muscles around his mouth. He squeezed my hand, a gesture of comfort. "It's okay, Mom," he said soothingly, his voice loud enough for the doctor to hear. "The trauma. The doctor said you might lose some of your memory. It's okay. We'll get through this together." He thought he was looking at a broken old woman. He had no idea he had just created his worst enemy. My performance began that day in the ICU. I became the woman Ethan needed me to be. Frail, confused, with gaping, convenient holes in her memory. I played the part of the grateful, utterly dependent mother, leaning on her strong, capable son for everything. It was the most difficult, most nauseating role of my life. Every word of thanks I uttered tasted like ash in my mouth, but I knew it was my only weapon. His blinding arrogance was my shield. My mind, however, was clearer and sharper than it had been in years. The sedative was long out of my system, and the cold, diamond-hard fury had honed my senses. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. I needed an army. I started watching the hospital staff, not as caregivers, but as potential recruits, looking for a flicker of doubt, a sign of integrity. I found one in a night nurse named Sarah. She was a young woman, maybe in her early 30s, with kind, intelligent eyes but a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of myself at her age. I noticed the small things. She never turned her back on Ethan when he was in the room. She watched him with a quiet, unsettling suspicion when he thought no one was looking. One night, when she was checking my vitals and the room was quiet, I decided to take the biggest gamble of my life. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice barely audible, making sure the door was closed. "I need to tell you something. And I need you to believe me, even if it sounds crazy." I told her everything. The stolen money, the sedatives that made me seem senile, the freezer. I told her my son had tried to murder me, and that I was now faking my amnesia to stay alive. I watched her face, expecting to see shock, disbelief, maybe even a call for a psychiatric evaluation. Instead, she just nodded slowly, her expression grim and knowing. "I believe you, Eleanor," she said, her voice low and steady. I knew there was something wrong. A few nights ago, I walked in unexpectedly, and he was fiddling with the alarm settings on your 4 drip. When he saw me, he jumped like a startled cat. He said he was just checking it, but his hands were shaking. She looked me straight in the eye, and I saw a flicker of her own past pain. My ex-husband was a man just like that. So charming on the outside, a controlling monster behind closed doors. I know that look. "What do you need from me?" It felt like the first deep, true breath I'd taken in months. I wasn't alone anymore. "I need a way to communicate safely. I need to contact my nephew Kevin, he's an IT expert, and an old family friend, an accountant named Frank." Without Ethan ever knowing, Sarah became my lifeline, my secret agent inside the hospital walls. The very next night, she slipped me a small, cheap, prepaid burner phone, the kind you buy with cash at a gas station. "Text only and keep it hidden in your mattress when you're not using it," she warned, her eyes scanning the hallway. "He's been asking the staff a lot of questions about your mental state. He's building his narrative." That night, under the thin hospital blanket, I sent my first message, my fingers fumbling with the tiny buttons. It was to my nephew Kevin. He was a good boy. A computer was whom Ethan had conveniently transferred to a remote, dead-end office in El Paso right after he started asking uncomfortable questions about the company's finances. My message was simple. "Aunt Ellie, I'm okay. I remember everything. We need to talk. Burn this number after you read it." His reply came back in less than a minute. "Thank God. I knew something was wrong. What do you need me to do?" I also contacted Frank, my dear retired accountant friend. He was overjoyed to hear I was lucid and physically shaking with rage when I told him about the murder attempt. The three of us, the old woman, the young nurse, the exiled nephew, and the retired accountant, formed a secret council, a resistance movement communicating through short, coded texts on a burner phone. Frank started digging deeper into the financial records from the outside, looking for the paper trail. Kevin began looking for a digital way in, a backdoor into the company's servers. It was Frank who insisted on the next crucial step. We spoke in a brief, whispered phone call arranged by Sarah when she knew Ethan was in a meeting. "Ellie, you need hard, irrefutable proof," he told me, his voice tight with urgency. "You need to get him talking. You need a full confession on tape. His word against yours, with his fabricated medical reports. A good lawyer could tear you apart on the stand. But how could I get a recorder into a secure hospital room? It was Kevin who solved it. He was a genius. He ordered a small, innocuous-looking black pen online. A pen that was also a high-fidelity, voice-activated digital recorder. He had it delivered overnight to Sarah's address. She brought it to me the next morning, hidden inside a bouquet of flowers Ethan had sent. It felt like something out of a spy movie, a desperate, unbelievable plot. There I was, a 74-year-old grandmother, orchestrating a counter-espionage operation from my hospital bed. Ethan would visit every day, oozing false sympathy, telling me about his grand plans for the company now that I was resting, and discussing the generous salary he was giving himself. And every day, I would click the top of that simple black pen in the pocket of my robe, its tiny blue light blinking once, and record every single self-incriminating lie that came out of his mouth. With my small team of loyal allies, the game had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the prey. I was the spider, and I was about to start spinning my web. With the recording pen in my possession, every visit from Ethan transformed into a high-stakes performance on a stage for one. I had to be perfect. I had to be the confused but adoring mother, trusting him implicitly, creating an environment so safe and non-threatening that his monumental ego would do the work for me. "Oh, Ethan," I'd say one afternoon, my voice trembling slightly as I struggled to open a small container of Jell-O. "I'm so worried about the business. All those numbers and contracts, my head just swims. Are you sure you can handle it all by yourself?" "Of course, Mom," he'd reply, puffing out his chest as he took the container from me. "I've been handling it for years, really. Dad was a great man, but he was too cautious. He never understood that in today's market, you have to be aggressive to win." Click. The pen in my pocket was my silent, loyal witness. I learned to prod gently, to play on his belief in my shattered memory. "I just have these flashes, dear," I'd say, looking at him with wide, innocent eyes. "These strange, bad dreams about the freezer. Sometimes I dream that someone locked me in." He'd pat my hand, his touch feeling like a cold spider on my skin. "That's just the trauma, Mom. A tragic accident. The doctor explained this would happen. Your mind is creating false memories to cope." Click. Another lie, another thread in the web. "The important thing is you're safe now. I'm here. I'll take care of everything." Meanwhile, my nephew Kevin was working his own brand of magic. He found a vulnerability, a backdoor in the company's old email server that Ethan, in his arrogance, had overlooked. He burrowed into the system like a digital termite. What he discovered made my blood run even colder. He sent me screenshots through a secure messaging app Sarah had helped me install. It was Ethan's search history from the weeks leading up to the accident. Hypothermia survival rates by age and weight. How long for a senior citizen to lose consciousness at 0 degrees Fahrenheit? Common malfunctions of industrial freezer door latches. How to contest a will based on diminished mental capacity. He had researched my murder with the detached precision of an engineer planning a demolition. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated business decision. Then Kevin hit the jackpot. Buried deep in a temporary folder on Ethan's cloud drive, he found it. A scanned copy of a life insurance policy Ethan had taken out on me just 3 weeks before he locked me in the freezer. The policy was for $5 million. The sole beneficiary was listed as Ethan Vance. My signature on the document was a clumsy, obvious forgery, an insult to the thousands of contracts and checks I had signed in my life. He was planning to use the insurance payout to cover his tracks, pay off his debts from stealing company money, and fund his new life after my funeral. The inheritance he couldn't be bothered to wait for. Kevin encrypted the files and sent them immediately to Frank. Our accountant friend began building a bulletproof legal case with a discreet bulldog of a lawyer he trusted, someone completely outside of Ethan's circle of well-paid corporate attorneys. The evidence was piling up, a mountain of damning proof. We had him on fraud, on forgery, on elder abuse, on premeditated attempted murder. We had recordings of him lying, manipulating, and covering his tracks. You might think this is where the plan was set, where we had enough to go to the police. But Frank was cautious. Ellie, this is great, but a smart lawyer will claim he was just researching for a safety report, that the insurance was a misunderstanding. It's circumstantial. We need a direct confession for what he did in that freezer. Something that leaves no room for doubt. He was right. I needed to get Ethan to admit, in his own words, that he had closed that door. And as if on cue, Ethan was about to make another move, one that showed just how ruthless he truly was, a move that would seal his own fate forever. We had the financial crimes, but I needed the personal one, the one that mattered most. To get it, I knew I had to put myself back in the lion's den. My discharge from the hospital was approved. I was still weak, needing a cane to walk, which only added to my disguise as a helpless invalid. Ethan arrived, all smiles, to take me home. "I've got a surprise for you, Mom," he announced cheerfully. "We're not going back to the old house. It's too big, too full of memories, too stressful for your recovery. I've arranged for us to go to a quiet, private lakeside cabin for a few weeks. Just you and me. So I can take care of you properly. A quiet, isolated cabin. With the man who had already tried to kill me once. It was a one-way trip. And I knew with every fiber of my being that I had to take it. The day before I was scheduled to be discharged, a piece of news reached me that put a knot of solid ice in my stomach. Sarah, my angel of a nurse, came into my room during her rounds, her face uncharacteristically pale. "Eleanor," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "I just came from the surgical floor. Brenda is awake. She's out of her coma." A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over me. Brenda had survived. That tough, wonderful woman had made it through. But my relief was immediately followed by a chilling, heart-stopping fear. If Brenda was awake, she was a witness. A credible, lucid witness. And Ethan would know that within the hour. My fear was terrifyingly justified. That evening I got a frantic, coded text from Kevin on my burner phone. It was just 4 words. Ethan went to see B's husband. Later that night, after Ethan had paid his loving daily visit and left, Kevin called me on the burner. His voice was tight with a cold, controlled anger I had never heard from him before. He told me what had happened. Ethan hadn't gone to Brenda's room to offer well wishes. He had intercepted her husband, a quiet, hard-working man named Tom, in the hospital cafeteria as he was getting a cup of coffee. Tom had worked on our loading docks for 20 years. A good man. Ethan had slid a company check across the table. It was for $50,000. A gift from the company, Ethan had said smoothly, his voice a low, confidential murmur. To help with the unexpected medical bills. We are all so devastated by this terrible, tragic accident. And we want to make sure Brenda gets the best possible care, to help her recover from her confusion. Tom, bless his honest heart, knew exactly what Ethan was doing. He looked at the check, then back at Ethan's smiling face. "My wife is not confused," he said, his voice flat. Ethan's smile tightened at the edges. "Of course not. But trauma does strange things to the mind, Tom. It would be a shame if her jumbled memories of this tragic accident caused more trouble for everyone. For her job. For your family's future." He tapped a manicured finger on the check. "Think of this as a promotion. A bonus, for your discretion and understanding during this difficult time." It was a blatant threat, wrapped in the thin, flimsy veneer of corporate concern. But Tom was no fool. He had worked for Arthur and me for 2 decades. He knew what integrity looked like. He pushed the check back across the table so hard it skidded to a stop right in front of Ethan. "My wife's integrity isn't for sale," he told Ethan, his voice low but firm. "And neither is mine." Tom stood up, left the cafeteria without another word, and immediately called his son, who then called Kevin. The entire sordid exchange, a clear case of witness tampering, was now a crucial part of our growing case file. This was his fatal mistake. He thought money and fear could control everyone. He thought he could buy silence and loyalty like they were commodities on the stock market. But he fundamentally underestimated the decency of the people my husband and I had treated like family for 40 years. These were people who valued honor more than a paycheck, who knew the difference between right and wrong. When Ethan came to my room later that night for his final visit before my discharge, I could see the frustration simmering behind his calm facade. He had failed to neutralize the other witness. Now all his focus, all his desperate, murderous intent would be on me. The lakeside cabin was no longer just a convenient plan. It was an urgent, absolute necessity for him. He needed to finish the job, and he needed to do it quickly before Brenda could talk to the police, before I could remember anything else. "All packed and ready to go, Mom?" he asked, his voice a little too cheerful, a little too bright. "It's going to be so peaceful. No phones, no stressful visitors. Just us." "That sounds wonderful, dear," I said, my voice deliberately frail, my hand clutching the cool, hard shape of the recording pen in my pocket. Now he wasn't just coming for me. He was trying to silence anyone who knew the truth. The clock was ticking, and my final terrifying performance was about to begin. The day I left the hospital, I put on the performance of a lifetime. I allowed myself to look as frail and broken as he believed me to be. I leaned heavily on Ethan's arm as he guided me through the hospital corridors in a wheelchair, my movements slow and uncertain. I let a look of vacant, placid confusion settle on my face. I was the perfect image of a helpless elderly woman, completely at the mercy of her loving, doting son. He bought every second of it, his chest puffed out with pride and control. He was so sure he was in charge. As we got into his expensive black luxury car, he told me he'd already packed a small bag for me with my essentials. "Everything is taken care of, Mom. You just relax and enjoy the ride." I pretended to doze off in the plush leather passenger seat, my head lolling against the window. But through my barely open eyelids, I watched the road signs flashing by. We weren't heading north toward the lake region. We were heading west, out of the suburbs and into the desolate, sun-bleached landscape of rural West Texas, where the towns got smaller and the distances between them grew vast. In the pocket of my robe I felt the burner phone vibrate once, a short, sharp buzz, the confirmation signal from Kevin. He and Frank, along with two plainclothes police officers in an unmarked sedan, were following us, maintaining a safe, invisible distance. The trap was set. All I had to do now was play the bait and get the confession. After an hour of highway driving, Ethan turned off onto a cracked, crumbling asphalt road, and then a few miles later onto a dusty, rutted dirt track. The car bounced and jostled violently, waking me from my nap. "Where are we, Ethan?" I asked, my voice filled with a carefully manufactured note of fear and confusion. "This doesn't look like the way to any lake I know." "It's a shortcut, Mom," he said without even looking at me, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Quieter this way." Finally, we pulled up to an old, dilapidated ranch house. It was a skeleton of a building. The windows were boarded up, the porch was sagging like a tired old man, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the dry grass. There was nothing for miles around but empty fields and a handful of vultures circling lazily in the pale, indifferent blue sky. This was a place where someone could disappear forever. He turned off the engine, and the silence that filled the car was suddenly heavy, suffocating, and menacing. He turned to face me, and in the harsh sunlight, the mask of the concerned sun was completely gone. What was left was cold, hard, and utterly without pity. "Let's drop the act, Mom," he said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "I know you remember everything. Your little performance at the hospital was good, I'll give you that. But you slipped up. When you asked me about Brenda, your eyes were too sharp. Too clear. You're not confused at all, are you?" There was no point in pretending anymore. I straightened up in my seat, the frailness falling away from me like a snake shedding its skin. I met his gaze directly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But my voice when it came was as steady as a rock. "No, Ethan. I'm not. I remember everything." He actually smiled, a thin, cruel, humorless slash across his face. "I knew it. You were always too stubborn for your own good. It would have been so much easier for everyone if you just faded away gracefully. What was the plan here, Ethan? I asked, my hand tightening on the recording pin in my pocket until my knuckles were white. Another unfortunate accident? Something like that, he said with a casual, horrifying shrug. This old ranch has a deep, dry well out back. Been abandoned for 50 years. It's a shame, really. A confused old woman, still suffering from the effects of her trauma, gets out of the car, wanders off while her son is getting the bags, and falls. A tragic, tragic accident. He savored the words. By the time anyone finds you days from now, it'll be far too late. I'd be the grieving son, left with the terrible burden of a funeral and an inheritance, forced to take over the company to honor my poor, departed mother's legacy. I'd even have that crooked neurologist's report to back up my story about your declining state. It's perfect. Watertight. He laid out his whole monstrous, sickening plan, so confident in his victory, so sure that he held all the cards, that he had thought of everything. He was so busy gloating, so lost in the brilliance of his own evil, he never saw the flashing blue and red lights until they were reflecting in his cold, empty eyes. The two unmarked cars came tearing down that forgotten dirt road, spitting dust and gravel like angry beasts. They screeched to a halt in a perfectly executed maneuver, one in front of Ethan's luxury sedan and one behind, boxing him in completely. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw real genuine panic flash across my son's face. His carefully constructed composure shattered like glass. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by the terrified, uncomprehending look of a cornered animal. "What is this?" he stammered, his head whipping back and forth between the police officers now getting out of their cars, their movements calm and professional, and me sitting perfectly still in the passenger seat. You called them? How could you?" "I didn't have to," I said, my voice quiet but carrying over the sudden tense silence. I held up the simple black pen between my thumb and forefinger. "This did. It's been recording everything, Ethan. Every single word of your vile confession. And my nephew Kevin and these nice police officers have been listening to a live feed for the last 10 minutes. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly pasty gray. The officers were at his window now, a firm, authoritative tap on the glass. It was over. The game was up. As they opened his door, pulled him from the car, and pushed him against the hood to cuff him, his body suddenly limp with shock, he looked at me one last time. His face was a twisted mask of hatred, disbelief, and a flicker of something that almost looked like grudging respect. "You could have inherited an empire, Ethan," I said through the open car door, the tears I had held back for weeks, for months finally streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sadness, but tears of a profound, heartbreaking finality. "An empire your father and I built for our children, for you. Instead you chose a cage." His arrest was just the beginning of the reckoning. 2 weeks later, it was the day of our company's annual board meeting. I had been out of the public eye since my accident, a ghost in my own company. The narrative Ethan had spun was that I was recovering but mentally fragile, a beloved but irrelevant figurehead. His cronies, the men he had promoted and paid off, were running the show now. They expected me to sit in a corner, a silent, broken old woman. When I walked into that boardroom, I wasn't leaning on a cane. I was wearing my sharpest navy blue suit, the one Arthur always said made me look like a 5-star general. My hair was perfectly coiffed. My gaze was steady. I walked straight to the head of the polished mahogany table, the seat that had always been Arthur's, the seat Ethan's right-hand man was now occupying, and I said, my voice ringing with an authority they hadn't heard in years, "Get out of my chair." A nervous, shocked silence fell over the room. The man scrambled to his feet. I sat down, placed my portfolio on the table, and looked at the faces of the men who had helped my son try to destroy me. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer, enjoying their discomfort. Then I began to speak. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply methodically laid out the ice-cold truth. "For the past 3 years," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the stale air, "this company, our company, has been systematically plundered from the inside by my son, Ethan Vance, and by several of the people sitting in this very room." Chaos erupted. Shouts of preposterous, slander. "She's not well." But I was prepared. My nephew Kevin, standing by the door, began distributing thick, spiral-bound folders to every person at the table. Inside those folders, I continued over the din, you will find the evidence. The fraudulent land sales. The forged life insurance policy documents. The shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. It's all in there. As they frantically flipped through the pages, their faces turning from smug to panicked, I pressed a button on a small remote. A speaker system I'd had Kevin secretly install began to play the first recording from the pen, Ethan's voice, cool and clear, describing his plans for the company to a supposedly incapacitated me. Then came the next recording and the next. As the final damning words of his confession from the car ride filled the room, a confused old woman wanders off and falls, a tragic accident. The boardroom door swung open. 2 uniformed police officers and a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit walked in, their expressions grim. Frank Miller, Steve Jensen, Robert Kent, the detective said, reading from a list of names on the board. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. As the 3 men were led away in handcuffs, sputtering and protesting, I stood up and addressed the shocked, silent employees who remained. This company was built on integrity, loyalty, and hard work. I declared, my voice booming with a strength I hadn't felt in years. And today we are taking it back. The rot has been cut out. For anyone in this room who shares our original values, your future here is secure. For those who do not, the door is right there. As they led my son's partners away, a new silence fell over the room. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of a new, clean, and uncertain beginning. The trials were swift and brutal. With the mountain of digital evidence Kevin had uncovered, the damning recordings from my pen, and the courageous testimony from Brenda and her husband Tom, the case was airtight. Ethan's expensive team of lawyers couldn't do a thing. They tried to paint me as a vindictive, senile old woman, but the proof was overwhelming. He was found guilty of attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other charges I can no longer remember. The judge, a woman about my own age with sharp, intelligent eyes, looked at Ethan with undisguised contempt. She gave him a sentence of life in prison, with no possibility of parole. His accomplices received lengthy sentences as well. Justice, at least the kind of justice a courtroom can provide, was served. But there is no victory in watching your own son, the baby you once held in your arms, be led away in chains for the rest of his natural life. There is no triumph in that. There's only a deep, profound, aching grief for the boy he used to be, and the man he could have become. I had to destroy a part of my own heart to save the legacy his father and I had built. In the months that followed, we began the difficult, painful work of rebuilding. It was harder than starting from scratch 40 years ago. We had to undo the damage, root out the culture of corruption Ethan had fostered. We brought back the honest, hard-working employees he had fired or pushed out. We went, hat in hand, to our old, trusted suppliers and begged them to work with us again. We had to hire a new team of forensic accountants and lawyers just to untangle the complex financial mess he had created. A web of deceit that stretched across 3 states and 2 foreign countries. My nephew, Kevin, who had been my secret weapon, stepped up to become our new CFO. His integrity and quiet brilliance were the balm on the deep wounds of the company. My other children, Claire and Mark, flew in and rallied around me, their initial shock and disbelief giving way to a fierce protective love. They helped me through the darkest days, the painful conversations, the public scrutiny. We had to face the whispers, the local news stories, the pitying looks in the grocery store. The Van Cess, that solid, respected Texas family, were now the subject of scandalous gossip. But we faced it together. Gradually, slowly, the company began to heal. The trust we had lost was painstakingly earned back, one honest deal at a time. The Vance Barbecue Supply name, once tarnished by scandal, once again became a symbol of Texas quality and family values, the right kind of family values. Today, at 79, I still go into the office every day. Not because I have to, but because it is my purpose. It is my legacy. It is Arthur's legacy. My health is good. Without Ethan's sedatives in my system, the dizzy spells and confusion vanished completely. I am as sharp and clear-headed as I have ever been. On my big oak desk, right next to the picture of Arthur, I keep a small, twisted piece of metal. It's from the handle of the freezer door that didn't kill me. It's a reminder. A reminder that even in the coldest, darkest, most hopeless of places, A single spark of defiance can ignite a fire that burns away all the lies. Life can, and it will push you into a freezer of its own. It might be a betrayal from a spouse, a child, a sibling. It might be a loss that feels so absolute it freezes your soul. It might be a moment when you feel utterly alone and powerless, when the world tells you that you are old or weak or confused or irrelevant. It will trap you in the dark and wait for you to give up, to let the cold take you. But I'm here today to tell you this. Inside every single one of us there is a fire. It might be just a tiny forgotten ember, buried under years of pain or self-doubt, but it is there. Don't wait for the cold to fade. Don't wait for someone else to come and open the door. You have to be your own rescue. Find that ember. Protect it. Breathe on it. And when the time is right, you let it roar. You choose to burn. Thank you for listening to my story. I know in my heart that I can't be the only one who has faced a battle like this within their own family, who has been made to feel small or crazy by the people who should have loved them most. If you've ever had to find your own fire in a moment of darkness, please share your story in the comments below. Let's create a bonfire of resilience together. A light that can warm us all and show the world that we are not invisible. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories of survival and strength. My name is Eleanor Vance. I survived the cold, and I will continue to burn brightly until my very last breath.